Do you feel like weight management is a never-ending battle you can't win? Why can some people eat whatever they want and never gain weight, while you put on pounds by drinking water? Why does rebound weight gain linger after dieting, sometimes leaving you heavier than before? Why does it feel like the harder we try, the further we get from our ideal selves? If you've ever felt confused or hopeless about this, then congratulations, you've come to the right place. Because none of this is actually your fault. Today, the classic book we're diving into is Why We Eat Too Much. Its author, Andrew Jenkinson, is a surgeon who deals with severe obesity daily. He's heard countless patients pour out their despair, saying, "Doctor, it's not that I lack willpower. I really can't help it." This overwhelming helplessness made him realize the widely accepted eat less, move more theory must have serious flaws. So this doctor, scalpel in hand, spent 5 years investigating. Like a detective, he set out to uncover the truth that has been overlooked by almost everyone, including most doctors. And what he ultimately discovered is enough to overturn everything we thought we knew about body weight. He tells us that the reason we keep losing the battle with our weight isn't because we're lazy or greedy, but because we've been using the wrong map and fighting the wrong enemy from the very start. At the heart of this truth is a hidden switch inside our bodies, which the author calls the weight set point. You can think of it like the thermostat on your home's air conditioner. If you set the temperature to 26 degrees, no matter how scorching hot it is outside in summer or how freezing cold it is in winter, the air conditioner will automatically cool or heat the room, working hard to keep it at your chosen temperature. Our bodies have a similar kind of weight thermostat which is controlled by our subconscious brain. Based on your genes, your upbringing, and your current environment, it quietly sets what it believes is the safest weight for you. This is your weight set point. Your body acts like a loyal guardian, doing whatever it takes to defend the set point. When you try to lower your weight below the set point by dieting, your body sounds the alarm. Oh no! The owner is facing a famine. This is life-threatening, so it immediately activates a powerful defense mechanism, known as a negative feedback system. It ramps up your appetite, making you crave high-calorie foods. At the same time, it quietly lowers your basal metabolic rate, turning you into an energy-saving machine, so even if you're just lying down and not moving, you burn less energy than before. That's why, as you keep dieting, you start to feel hungrier and crave food even more. You also feel weak all over and your mood drops. That's because your whole body is working against you, desperately trying to pull your weight back up to what it considers the safe line. The same thing happens in reverse. If you binge during the holidays and your weight accidentally goes above the set point, your body thinks you have too much energy stored, which isn't safe because you can't run fast and might get eaten by wild animals. So it activates its defenses again, lowering your appetite and quietly boosting your metabolism to burn off the extra calories. Doesn't this theory sound a bit far-fetched? Let's look at a famous experiment called the Vermont prison experiment. Scientists recruited a group of inmates and tried to make them gain 25% of their body weight in 3 months by overfeeding them. The prisoners' meals jumped from a normal 2,200 calories a day to 4,000 calories. At first, their weight steadily increased, but soon something strange happened. Even though they were stuffing themselves every day, their weight hit an invisible wall and just wouldn't go up any further. So the scientists had no choice but to up the ante, raising their calorie intake to a staggering 8,000 or even 10,000 calories a day. That's equivalent to 4 or 5 days worth of food for a normal person. Even so, some inmates stubbornly resisted gaining more weight. The secret was that their metabolic rates had increased dramatically. Their bodies automatically switched to burn mode, incinerating the extra calories like useless firewood, all to protect themselves from turning into out-of-control fat people. This experiment powerfully demonstrated just how much our bodies dislike drastic changes in weight. Whether it's losing or gaining, it will use every physiological means at its disposal. It keeps us firmly anchored at the weight set point determined by our brains. So, when you fail to lose weight, it's really not because you lack willpower. You're up against a precise and awe-inspiring survival mechanism that's deeply rooted in our genes and has evolved over millions of years. So here's the question. Since this weight set point is so powerful, why is it that some people's set point is a healthy 70 kilograms, while others have their set at 100 kilograms or even higher? Who is really pulling the strings behind this mysterious thermostat, and what is its toxin? This is the deeper secret about obesity that we're about to explore next. In the previous section, we uncovered the body's first big secret. Our weight isn't something we can freely increase or decrease as we wish. Instead, it's tightly guarded by an internal thermostat called the weight set point. This set point will defend what it considers the safest weight at all costs, adjusting our appetite and metabolism to do so. This explains why simply starving yourself to lose weight always ends in a painful rebound. But this immediately brings up an even more troubling question. Since everyone has this internal thermostat, why is mine set at 80 kilograms while my friend, who never gains weight no matter what she eats, can easily maintain 60 kilograms? Who decides the reading on this set point? In this section, we'll uncover the ultimate mystery behind why some people are more prone to gaining weight. The author uses a clever analogy in the book: raising cattle. Imagine 3 ranches. On the first ranch, the cows eat only the most natural grass every day. They come in all shapes and sizes, some big, some small, but most are very healthy and normal. They're pretty much like the lean sacred cows you'd see on India's streets. On the second ranch, the cow's diet was upgraded. They eat high-calorie cafeteria food, a mix of corn and vegetable oil. The result? The average weight of these cows is much higher than that of the grass-fed cows, and there's a significant increase in overweight cows. But the fattest cows are from the third ranch. They eat the same high-calorie cafeteria food and have been selectively bred for over a dozen generations. Ranchers always choose the fastest-growing, fattest cows to breed the next generation. As a result, almost every cow on this ranch is a giant. These 3 ranches correspond to the 3 different states of us humans. The first ranch is like our ancestors, the hunter-gatherers, who ate all natural foods and hardly ever had problems with obesity. The second ranch represents most of us modern people, living in an environment surrounded by processed foods and fast food, which naturally leads to many people being overweight or obese. The third ranch, on the other hand, corresponds to certain special groups whose genes seem to have undergone selective breeding, making them naturally more prone to storing fat. Once they enter our modern food environment, their risk of obesity skyrockets. You might say, isn't this determined by genes? That's right, but the influence of genes might be far greater than you imagine. There was a study that overturned understanding. Scientists tracked 2,000 pairs of identical twins adopted by different families from a young age. These twins had the same genes, but the family environments they grew up in, their eating habits, and their parents' educational methods were different. If family environment and personal effort were the key factors in determining whether someone is fat or thin, then their weights should have been all over the place. But the results were shocking. These twins, who had never even met each other, showed up to 75% consistency in their level of obesity as adults, while the influence of family environment accounted for only about 10%. This study reveals a harsh yet oddly comforting truth when it comes to what determines whether we are fat or thin. Genes play an absolutely dominant role. Are you naturally prone to gaining weight? There's a 75% chance that this was already written into your DNA the moment you were born. So, what kind of genes are considered selectively bred obesity genes? Geneticists have proposed a famous hypothesis called the thrifty gene. Throughout human history, famine and food shortages were the norm. Those whose bodies had highly efficient metabolisms, able to meticulously convert every bit of energy consumed into stored fat, were more likely to survive famines and pass on these thrifty genes to their descendants. The genes that once saved lives in the past have now become a tragic curse in today's world, where food is readily available. The book mentions the ancestors of Pacific Islanders, who sailed small boats on epic journeys spanning thousands of miles across the vast ocean. During those long days without water or food, only those with the most abundant fat reserves and the most frugal metabolisms could survive and reach those islands. Their genes were subjected to the ocean's harshest selection. When their descendants encountered Western fast food, obesity rates soared to the world's highest. Similarly tragic are the Pima Indians of the Americas, whose ancestors endured countless famines, developing a high concentration of thrifty genes. Today, the obesity rate among Pima people on American reservations has reached a staggering 67%, and diabetes incidence is 8 times the national average. These thrifty genes lost control when faced with modern processed foods. However, the story doesn't end here. In addition to the fixed set of genes you inherit from your parents, scientists have discovered an even more fascinating mechanism called epigenetics. Simply put, while you are still in your mother's womb, your genes act like a vigilant radar, quietly sensing the external environment and then making subtle adjustments and programming themselves so that you can better adapt to the world as soon as you are born. The book mentions a classic case: the Dutch hunger winter study. At the end of World War II, the Netherlands went through a severe famine, and many pregnant women endured hunger. The fetuses in their wombs sensed the signal of food scarcity, so their genes were programmed into a super thrifty mode to help them survive in a world with little to eat or wear. But who could have predicted that after these children were born, the war would end and the Netherlands would enter a time of peace and abundance? The thrifty genetic programming meant to help them survive famine became ineffective with abundant food. Studies found children born during famine had a higher risk of obesity and diabetes as adults compared to peers. Their bodies were misled by incorrect future expectations. More concerning, this epigenetic effect might not just impact one generation. A mother's nutritional status during pregnancy, whether malnutrition or overnutrition, can have lasting consequences. All of these factors can act like a Trojan horse, quietly encoding the risk of obesity into your body. This also explains why it seems like there are more and more overweight children with each generation. So now we understand that our body's weight set point, the thermostat inside us, is determined by an extremely complex program. 75% of it comes from our unchangeable genetic makeup, and another part comes from the profound epigenetic marks left to us by our mothers and even our grandmothers. Together, they determine whether, when faced with the same environment, we are the naturally slim lucky ones or the warriors who must battle with their weight for life. Alright, now that we know our weight is largely predetermined, does that mean we should just give up and surrender? Of course not. But this leads us to our next and most crucial question. Since my weight set point is so stubborn, can I go head-to-head with it? Can I use my strong willpower to force my weight down through the harshest diets? What will be the outcome of this battle where willpower challenges physiological instincts? In the next part, we'll talk about the tragedy of dieting and see why those magical weight loss diets ultimately only make you gain more weight. In the previous section, we talked about how each person's weight is largely determined by a set of factory-set genetic programs and epigenetic marks. Hearing this, many people might feel a bit discouraged, but at the same time, a spark of determination might ignite in their hearts. Fine, I admit my default settings might not be great, and my weight set point is naturally on the higher side, but surely human will can conquer nature. Don't I still have willpower? Can't I just rely on iron willpower to go head-to-head with my body and force my weight down with the strictest dieting? That's a great question because this is exactly what most of us really think when we try to lose weight. We believe that as long as we're tough enough on ourselves, we can overcome our body's instincts. But in this section, we're going to reveal the harshest and most heartbreaking truth behind this battle. Dieting isn't just a war that's destined to fail. It can even leave you facing an even stronger enemy in the next battle. The book mentions a famous weight loss reality show called The Biggest Loser. The show brings together a group of severely overweight ordinary people and puts them through months of hellish training and extremely strict dietary control. On camera, they sweat buckets, scream in pain, and display extraordinary willpower, and the results are always inspiring. By the end of the show, each of them has lost dozens of kilos, as if they've been reborn. They've been given a new lease on life. This show sends an incredibly clear message. Look, if you work hard, there's no fat you can't lose. If you fail, it's because you didn't try hard. But is that really the case? Scientists at the National Institutes of Health in the United States did something very meaningful. They found 14 contestants who had participated in The Biggest Loser and conducted a 6-year follow-up study to see what happened to those former weight loss heroes. The results were shocking. By the end of the show, these contestants had lost an astonishing average of 58 kilograms each, but 6 years later, they had regained an average of 41 kilograms. They had almost gone back to square one, and that wasn't even the worst part. The most frightening thing was that scientists found their bodies had been wrecked by that hellish weight loss journey. 6 years later, their metabolic rates were, on average, over 700 kilocalories lower per day than before they participated. What does that mean? It means that for a former contestant, even if they do nothing, the energy their body automatically burns each day is over 700 kilocalories less than someone of the same current weight. That's 700 kilocalories less than an average person of the same age, gender, and weight. This is equivalent to having to eat one less full meal with 3 main dishes every day, or having to run an extra 10 kilometers daily just to barely maintain their weight. Their bodies had been permanently switched to an extreme energy-saving mode by that brutal weight loss process. After the dieting ended, not only did their weight not decrease, it actually rebounded like an angry guard. With a lower metabolism and stronger hunger, their bodies desperately tried to regain lost weight. This isn't a failure of willpower, it's a physiological tragedy. This perfectly explains the yo-yo dieting effect we're all too familiar with and find so painful. Every time you start dieting, your brain receives an urgent alarm. Famine is coming, survival is threatened. Can't tell whether you're starving yourself voluntarily to fit into a beautiful dress, or if there's really chaos and no food. Out of instinct to protect you, it immediately activates its defenses. When you finish dieting and return to normal eating, your frightened brain will sound the alarm. That last famine was terrifying. I barely made it through. Just in case, before the next famine comes, I have to store even more energy. So, it quietly raises your weight set point a little. The more weight you lose, the higher the set point becomes, and the higher the set point, the harder it is to lose weight next time. Repeated dieting ultimately becomes the best way to gain weight. The book uses a brilliant analogy for this. He says our body's weight regulation system operates subconsciously, just like breathing. You don't need to remind yourself to breathe, your brain takes care of it automatically. Of course, you can consciously hold your breath to temporarily fight this system, But the longer you hold it, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Your body will start screaming at you to let go. Eventually, you always give in and start taking big breaths again. It's the same with dieting. If you use willpower to force your body into a state of hunger, it's like holding your breath underwater. Your body will become increasingly uncomfortable, and feelings of hunger and fatigue will overwhelm you like a tidal wave. In the end, when you can't take it anymore and rush into a bakery, stuffing a piece of dessert into your mouth, it's just like finally surfacing after holding your breath for a long time and taking that first gulp of fresh air. Your subconscious brain takes over. Once again, your subconscious has won. So now we know that trying to fight your body's weight set point with willpower is like trying to challenge your respiratory system by holding your breath. It's a doomed effort that will only harm your body. It slows down your metabolism and makes you feel hungrier. Most importantly, it pushes your weight set point even higher, trapping you deeper and deeper in the quagmire of obesity. So, what specific weapons does the body use to launch this counterattack? When your weight set point is raised, how does it manipulate your body, making you eat uncontrollably and store what you eat even more efficiently? Behind all this is a precise and complex chemical war led by various hormones. In the next part, let's get to know the two key commanders in this war, the accelerators of appetite. Ghrelin and the supreme commander of body weight, leptin. Let's see how they manipulate our hunger and satiety without us even realizing it. In the previous section, we saw how weight loss is a tragic yet futile battle. Our body, this loyal and somewhat stubborn guardian, will use every means possible, like lowering metabolism, to resist the famine we impose on it. But that's not its only weapon. Besides switching our body into energy-saving mode, it will also launch an even more terrifying chemical war, directly manipulating our brains and making us surrender to food. Now, let's get to know the real masterminds hidden within our bodies in this war. Appetite hormones. First up is our hunger accelerator, a guy whose name already sounds rather unfriendly. Ghrelin. It's mainly secreted by the lining of our stomach and is the primary signal in the body urging you to eat. Whenever it's mealtime or your stomach is empty, its levels surge in your blood, then rush to your brain and loudly shout, "Eat something, I'm hungry," making you restless. Your mind becomes filled with images of delicious food. What's even more interesting is that it also stimulates the reward center in your brain, making food taste especially good. That's why when you're starving, even a simple plate of egg fried rice can seem incredibly tasty. It's all thanks to ghrelin putting a delicious filter on your food. So what happens to this hunger accelerator when we go on a diet? Scientists at the University of Washington conducted a study where they had a group of volunteers follow a low-calorie diet for 6 months. They successfully reduced their average body weight by 17%. Sounds great, right? But when the scientists measured the levels of ghrelin in their bodies, they discovered a startling truth. Compared to before the diet, these people who had successfully lost weight had ghrelin levels that were consistently 24% higher throughout the entire day. What does this mean? It means they felt hungrier all the time than they did before, even right after eating. The lowest level of ghrelin in their blood was almost as high as the peak they used to reach before dieting, when they were starving and about to eat lunch. In other words, dieting turns your body into an insatiable hunger monster, making you feel ravenous all day long, unable to think about anything except your next meal. Of course, where there's an accelerator, there's also a brake. Our bodies also have a hormone called peptide YY, which is released by the small intestine after we eat and tells the brain, "Okay, I'm full, you can stop now." It's our signal for feeling full. So what happens to this braking system after dieting? Another study gave us an even more discouraging answer. The research found that after dieting, our body satiety signals become dulled. In other words, not only do you get hungry more easily than before, but it's also harder to feel full even when you eat the same amount as before. What's worse, this malfunctioning accelerator and brake system doesn't return to normal even a whole year after you stop dieting. Dieting not only fails to help you stay slim in the long run. Instead, it completely messes up your appetite system. Up to this point, we've only been talking about the short-term appetite hormones that control our hunger every hour and every day. But above them, there's an even higher level commander-in-chief, responsible for long-term energy regulation over months and years. This is the most important weight regulator in our body. Leptin, which is produced directly by our fat cells. The name leptin sounds pretty appealing, and its function really lives up to that. It helps keep you lean. You can think of it like the fuel gauge in a car. Our body fat is the fuel tank. The more fat you have, the fuller the tank, and the more leptin your fat cells secrete. High levels of leptin send a clear signal to the brain, reporting to headquarters that the tank is full and energy reserves are sufficient, so there's no need to eat. Once the brain receives this signal, It lowers our appetite and at the same time boosts our metabolism, effortlessly burning off excess fat and bringing our weight back to its normal set point. On the other hand, if you diet and your fat decreases, the tank empties and leptin levels drop. The brain immediately sounds the alarm. Fuel is low, and the engine is about to stall. As a result, your appetite increases dramatically, metabolism slows, and your body desperately tries to bring your weight back up. This system perfectly explains why some people naturally stay slim. If they gain a few pounds over holidays, they can easily lose weight again with little effort. It's not because they have super strong willpower. It's actually because their body's leptin gauge works exceptionally well. In 1994, scientists discovered leptin, and the entire medical community was abuzz with excitement. They found a type of mouse that was naturally unable to produce leptin. These mice had an astonishingly large appetite and weighed more than twice as much as normal mice. Even though they were so overweight they could barely move, their brains, unable to receive leptin signals, thought they were starving and kept driving them to eat like crazy. But when scientists injected these obese mice with leptin, a miracle happened. Their appetites returned to normal, their weight quickly dropped, and their obesity was cured. Not long after, scientists discovered two little cousins in humans who had the same genetic defect. They also suffered from severe obesity due to extremely low levels of leptin. Similarly, after receiving leptin injections, they also lost weight miraculously. At that moment, scientists and pharmaceutical companies around the world believed they had found the holy grail to end obesity. Wasn't this the legendary weight loss miracle drug worth $1 trillion? If you just inject leptin into everyone who's overweight, wouldn't that solve everything? So, major companies poured huge sums of money into a race to develop leptin-based drugs, hoping to make a fortune. However, when they tried leptin on ordinary obese patients, a result that shocked everyone appeared. It was completely useless. No matter how much leptin was injected, these obese patients' weight didn't change at all. Why was this? Why couldn't the miracle seen in those little cousins and in mice be replicated in most of us? Scientists quickly discovered the key to the problem. When they tested the leptin levels in the blood of ordinary obese patients, they found that not only were their leptin levels not low, they were actually astonishingly high. Their bodies were desperately producing leptin, like sounding an air raid siren, screaming at the brain that the fuel tank was already full. It's about to explode. Stop eating. But their brains, like a hard-of-hearing old grandpa, completely ignore the deafening alarm. What on earth is going on? Why would the body's most important weight-regulating signal suddenly fail? What is interfering with the communication between leptin and the brain, making the brain so numb and unresponsive? The answer to this question leads us to the very core secret of obesity, a phenomenon known as leptin resistance. And this is exactly the mystery we'll be unraveling in the next part. In the previous part, we left off with a huge cliffhanger. Scientists, full of hope, discovered the miracle weight loss drug leptin, only to find that for most obese people, it was useless, like a spell that had lost its magic. Even though their bodies were flooded with this hormone that signals satiety, and their blood leptin levels were off the charts, their brains seemed deaf to it, still frantically sending out hunger signals. What's going on? It's as if the communication between the command center and the frontline soldiers has been mysteriously cut off. In this part, we're going to play the role of the signal operator and track down the mole hiding in our bodies that's interfering with our weight commander-in-chief, leptin. This mole is the deepest, most fundamental secret of obesity, and scientists call it leptin resistance. The term might sound a bit technical, but the principle is actually easy to understand. The author gives a brilliant analogy in the book. Leptin resistance is just like having a broken fuel gauge in your car. Imagine you've just left the gas station, your tank is filled to the brim, almost overflowing. But when you look down at the dashboard, the fuel gauge needle is stubbornly pointing to empty. You're startled, and your brain immediately sounds the alarm. Out of gas, you're about to break down. So you anxiously start searching for the next gas station, desperate to fill up the tank again. In our bodies, fat is like that gas tank. Leptin is the fuel gauge, and the brain is the driver watching it. When an obese person develops leptin resistance, their body is like a car with an overflowing tank but a broken fuel gauge. Their fat cells desperately produce leptin, shouting to the brain, "I'm full, I'm full." But due to the malfunction from leptin resistance, the brain doesn't receive the signal. The only reading it ever sees is 0. So the brain makes what seems to it the most reasonable decision. Oh no, the body is starving. We must eat immediately and also reduce energy expenditure. To conserve energy, the result is a dramatic increase in appetite, a sharp drop in metabolism, and the body enters a frenzied energy storage mode. This is why many obese people feel the fatter they get, the hungrier they become, and the hungrier they are, the more they want to eat, creating a vicious cycle impossible to break. Alright, problem is leptin resistance. So who exactly broke our precise fuel gauge? The author points out two main suspects in the book. The first suspect is a hormone that most of us have heard of, but very few truly understand its immense power. Its name is insulin. Under normal circumstances, insulin is the hero in our bodies. When we eat, especially foods containing sugar or starch, these foods are converted into glucose and enter our bloodstream, which is what we commonly refer to as blood sugar. Blood sugar is like a package of energy delivered throughout the body. And insulin is like a super dedicated delivery guy produced by our pancreas. His job is to use a key to open the doors of our body cells like muscle cells and fat cells and deliver these energy packages from the blood into them. The energy is either used up immediately or stored for future needs. You could say that insulin is the key player in keeping our blood sugar stable and ensuring our body functions properly. But the problem is, what happens if this delivery guy gets overworked? Imagine if you're constantly eating high-sugar foods all day long, and energy packages keep piling up in your blood. Your body has no choice but to churn out more and more insulin. These delivery guys end up shouting themselves hoarse at the doors of your cells. Open up and receive your delivery. When this kind of noise and commotion becomes the norm, the operator in our brain who's in charge of receiving leptin signals gets completely overwhelmed. All day long, all he hears is insulin shouting, leaving him no time to pay attention to that crucial call from leptin. As a result, the mailbox for leptin messages is constantly full, and the line is always busy, so those messages never get through. That's why chronically high insulin levels are one of the main culprits behind leptin resistance, which in turn causes your weight set point to keep climbing. The other culprit, inflammation, is even more hidden and insidious. We usually think of inflammation as a reaction that only happens when we're sick or injured, like when a wound becomes red, swollen, hot, and painful. But the author tells us that obesity itself is actually a state of chronic, low-grade, body-wide inflammation. Why is that? The book uses another vivid analogy. Our immune cells are like the police in our bodies. When they see damaged cells or invading bacteria and viruses, they release certain chemicals like pepper spray to eliminate the threat. This triggers inflammation. The problem arises when our fat cells become overly bloated from storing too much energy, and in our bodies, when the police patrol to this area, they mistakenly think these fat cells are sick or damaged troublemakers, so they start spraying pepper spray at these innocent fat cells over and over again. The result is that your whole body ends up in a mild state of inflammation. This chronic inflammation caused by obesity itself contributes to leptin resistance in two ways. On one hand, it directly causes inflammation in the weight control center of your brain as well. A brain that's inflamed naturally has a hard time sensitively receiving leptin signals. On the other hand, these inflammatory chemicals also make all the cells in your body less sensitive to insulin. In order to lower blood sugar, your body is forced to secrete more insulin than usual. See, this brings us back to our first culprit, high insulin. Now this terrible vicious cycle has come full circle. Let's break it down. An unhealthy diet causes you to gain weight and raises your insulin levels. The weight gain makes your fat cells overexpand, which in turn triggers chronic inflammation throughout your body. Chronic inflammation and high insulin, these two internal saboteurs, work together to disrupt the communication between leptin and your brain, resulting in severe leptin resistance. Your brain, like a blinded driver looking at a broken fuel gauge, thinks your body is in a state of famine. So it ramps up your appetite and slows down your metabolism. In the end, you eat more, store more, and become fatter, and as you get fatter, you trigger even more severe inflammation and higher insulin levels. This cycle repeats over and over until your weight is completely out of control. Alright, we've cracked the case. We now know that the root cause of runaway obesity is leptin resistance, and the culprits behind leptin resistance are chronically high insulin and chronic inflammation. But now, an ultimate question emerges. How did all of this start in the first place? Why is it that in the past few decades, hundreds of millions of people in human society have simultaneously developed problems with high insulin and chronic inflammation? What earth-shattering changes have taken place in our lives and our world that have created the perfect breeding ground for these two health killers to run rampant? To answer this question, we need to put on our detective hats, hop into a time machine, and travel back to the past to trace a fascinating yet sobering detective story about our food. In the previous section, we uncovered the mastermind behind the out-of-control obesity epidemic. Chronically high insulin levels and chronic inflammation. These two culprits create leptin resistance, making our brains deaf, ignoring the body's signals of fullness, trapping us in a vicious cycle of the fatter we get, the hungrier we feel, and the hungrier we are, the fatter we become. But an even bigger mystery has emerged. Where did these two most wanted criminals in the field of health actually come from? Why, throughout the long course of human history, did they suddenly rise to prominence and sweep across the globe in just the past few decades, bringing us this unprecedented obesity crisis? To answer this question, we must become detectives, put on our magnifying glasses, hop into a time machine, and travel back in time to trace the story of our food. A fascinating, twist-filled, and eye-opening detective story. Our tale begins at the very, very distant dawn of humanity. Did you know? The reason we became the intelligent beings we are today isn't because of anything else but because of eating, or to be more precise, cooking. The book mentions something called the expensive tissue hypothesis. Sounds pretty cool, right? It means that in order for humans to evolve such a large and extremely energy-consuming brain, we had to sacrifice another equally expensive organ within the body's limited energy budget. So what did we give up? It was our digestive system. Compared to our close relatives, chimpanzees, our digestive tract is much shorter. This became possible because about 1 million years ago, our ancestors mastered an incredible skill: cooking, using fire to cook food. This seemingly simple act is actually a form of external digestion. It greatly reduced the workload of our digestive system, allowing all the precious energy saved to be used for the development of our brains. You could say that it was that fire in the kitchen that sparked the flame of human intelligence. Our obsession with food and cooking is an instinct written into our genes. After mastering cooking, we learned to farm, gained a stable food supply, and developed cities and civilizations. Over tens of thousands of years, our relationship with food, although it has been constantly changing, overall it has remained harmonious. The real turning point came after the Industrial Revolution, when food, for the first time, was no longer just food. It became a commodity that could be mass-produced, transported over long distances, and preserved for long periods. And this was the fuse that truly ignited the health crisis of our era. It stems from a scientific debate of epic proportions, a trial of the century centered around food, that took place in the mid-20th century. The story moves to the United States in the 1950s, when a mysterious disease called heart disease began to spread, especially among men. Even the US President, Eisenhower, was not spared. The entire society was gripped by panic. Scientists launched an urgent investigation and quickly narrowed it down to 2 main suspects. One was sugar, and the other was fat. At that time, a British nutritionist named John Yudkin, like a lone whistleblower, firmly pointed out that sugar was the real culprit, pure white yet deadly. He wrote books and published papers to warn the public that sugar not only causes heart disease, but is also the main culprit behind obesity, diabetes, and tooth decay. Just as Yudkin's theory was about to take root in people's minds, a powerful force could no longer sit still. That was the sugar industry at the time. In order to protect their enormous commercial interests, they made a decision that seems almost unbelievable today, yet quietly changed the course of history back then. They secretly spent a large sum of money to bribe 3 renowned Harvard scientists, with only one goal: to write an authoritative scientific review that would completely clear sugar of all blame, and then find a scapegoat to pin everything on fat. This plan succeeded. The paper, published by top scientists in a leading medical journal, was a bombshell that completely reversed the direction of public opinion and the scientific community. Immediately after, another highly influential scientist, Ansel Keys, entered the scene. He published the famous 7-country study, using a seemingly flawless chart to prove to the world that there was a perfect positive correlation between saturated fat intake in the diet and heart disease mortality. The more fat a country consumed, the more people died of heart disease. With such ironclad evidence, fat was thoroughly nailed to the pillar of historical shame. However, behind the study was a massive academic deception. Keys had actually studied 22 countries at first, but in order to reach the conclusion he wanted, he deliberately selected only 7 countries that fit his theory for publication. He cleverly excluded countries like France and Germany, where people consume large amounts of butter and cheese, saturated fats, but have very low rates of heart disease. If data from all 22 countries were included, you would find that there is actually no necessary connection between saturated fat and heart disease. But in that era, with the powerful alliance of capital and academic authority, the truth was covered up. Fat, a natural food that had accompanied our human ancestors for millions of years, providing essential energy and nutrients, was completely demonized. In 1977, the US government officially released the dietary goals for the United States. This official document was based on the biased and flawed diet heart hypothesis. It recommended that everyone reduce their fat intake, especially the intake of saturated fat, while increasing the consumption of grains. The verdict of this century-long trial brought disastrous consequences to American life in the following decades. In order to cater to the low-fat, low-cholesterol health trend, the food industry began to drastically reformulate their products. But they quickly discovered a problem. When you remove fat from food, it tastes bland and unappetizing. So what did they do? They found a perfect substitute. It was that very sugar that had just been declared innocent. So, to make up for the loss of flavor, large amounts of sugar, salt, and refined carbohydrates were added to almost all processed foods. At the same time, to replace unhealthy animal fats like butter and lard, a brand new, cheaper type of fat was invented and used on a large scale: highly refined vegetable oils such as soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, and so on. From that moment on, the food pyramid that Americans relied on for survival was completely overturned. In just 2 or 3 decades, their dining tables underwent a dramatic transformation. Natural saturated fat-rich meats and dairy products were labeled as dangerous, while sugar, refined grains, and new types of vegetable oils, things our ancestors had never even heard of, suddenly became the stars of a healthy diet. Since the 1980s, the obesity rate curve has skyrocketed as if riding a rocket, perfectly mirroring the curves of our sugar and vegetable oil consumption, all soaring together. This is the conclusion of our detective story. We have found the sources of high insulin and chronic inflammation. They did not appear out of thin air, but were created by our own hands. In a century-long trial dominated by capital interests and flawed science, we wronged the good guy, natural fats, while letting the real culprit, sugar, go free, and even invited a brand new, more insidious enemy, artificial vegetable oils, onto our tables. So, what secrets are hidden behind this vegetable oil that we now worship as the new darling of health? And how has the transformation of fat types in our diet been encoded in a way we've never even heard of? How does this rewrite the fate of our cells, ultimately leading to obesity and various chronic diseases? In the next part, we will dive down to the cellular level to decode the key code that determines our health, the omega code. In the previous part, we acted like detectives and solved a century-old injustice that lasted for half a century. But the story doesn't end there. There's still the biggest accomplice that we haven't brought to justice yet. That is, after this grand trial, the so-called healthy artificial vegetable oils that were put on a pedestal to replace natural fats. We were told that they are rich in good fats, can lower cholesterol, and protect our hearts. But what if I told you that this health advice, which we have believed in so deeply, is actually the very thing that has opened the floodgates to modern obesity and chronic diseases? The last and most crucial key is this one. In this part, we're going to unlock the most fundamental health code in our bodies, the omega code. To crack this code, we first need to get to know 2 special types of fat that our bodies can't produce on their own and must obtain from food. They're like the vitamins of the fat world, known as essential fatty acids. These are the famous omega-3 and omega-6. You can think of them as a pair of brothers with very different personalities. Inside our bodies, they are constantly playing a game of power, fighting for territory, which is the cell membrane of every single one of our cells. The younger brother, omega-3, who wears green, is a flexible, friendly, and quick-witted good kid. He mainly comes from green plant leaves and fish that eat algae and plankton. His main job is to help our bodies reduce inflammation and make our cell membranes more fluid and adaptable. This allows all kinds of signals in the body to communicate smoothly. You can think of it as summer fat, representing vitality, energy, and calmness. On the other hand, the older brother, omega-6, who wears brown, is a stubborn, slow-moving guy with a bit of a bad temper. He mainly comes from plant seeds and nuts, including all kinds of grains we eat. His main job is to help the body promote inflammatory responses and blood clotting. When we need to deal with infections and injuries, he is essential, but if there's too much of him, our bodies can turn into a powder keg that ignites at the slightest spark. You can think of him as autumn and winter fat. It represents storage, defense, and being prepared for battle. Throughout most of human history, the amounts of these 2 brothers in our diet have remained in a very harmonious balance, roughly between 1:1 and 1:4. On our cell membranes, the number of green-clad younger brothers and brown-clad older brothers was about the same, and the body's inflammatory response was also in perfect balance. But ever since we started following that low-fat advice, everything changed. We started consuming large amounts of artificial vegetable oils extracted from seeds, like soybean oil and corn oil, which are almost entirely made up of the hot-tempered omega-6 older brother. We began feeding livestock grains instead of grass, which led to the meat, eggs, and dairy we eat being filled with omega-6 as well. The processed foods we eat, in order to extend shelf life, deliberately remove the precious omega-3s that are prone to oxidation and spoilage. So what are the consequences of all these changes? The ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 in our diet has been completely overturned, skyrocketing from the original, most natural 1:1 all the way to today's astonishing 20:1, and in some cities it even reaches 50:1. This means that on the cell membrane of every cell in our bodies, what used to be a peaceful, harmonious community is now occupied by 20 or even 50 stubborn and hot-tempered omega-6 big brothers. And that friendly, agile little brother in green is now left all alone. This disastrous imbalance in ratio delivers a triple blow to our health. The first blow is the chronic inflammation we mentioned in the previous section. There's way too much pro-inflammatory omega-6 and far too little anti-inflammatory omega-3 in our bodies. This turns our immune system into an overly suspicious and hypersensitive police force, constantly setting off unnecessary fires everywhere. This low-grade chronic inflammation is exactly what causes our brains to become deaf to leptin, the direct cause of our whole body cells becoming numb to insulin. The second blow is that our cells become rigid and stubborn. The cell membranes filled with omega-6 lose their original fluidity and permeability, turning into something like a solid city wall. This makes it very difficult for important messengers like insulin to knock on the cell's door and deliver blood sugar inside. In order to get the job done, the body has no choice but to send out even more insulin. desperately trying to break down the door. This directly leads to our insulin levels remaining high for long periods. And the third blow is even more peculiar and hidden. Scientists have discovered that omega-6 is actually the main raw material for a substance in our body similar to marijuana, endocannabinoids. When your diet is full of omega-6, it's like constantly supplying raw materials to your body's marijuana factory. What happens when this system is overactivated? It makes you much hungrier and makes high-calorie foods taste even better and more pleasurable. This also explains why. Why do we always feel a sense of satisfaction after eating fried chicken and French fries, and then soon crave them again? Because the vegetable oils in those foods are producing natural cannabinoids in your body, making you unable to resist them. So why does our body have such a seemingly foolish mechanism? The book offers a highly insightful evolutionary perspective. In nature, autumn is the season when seeds and nuts are most abundant. After animals eat these foods rich in omega-6, the proportion of omega-6 in their bodies increases. This is actually nature's way of signaling to them. Autumn has arrived, winter is coming soon, so hurry up and store fat to prepare for the cold season. As a result, their appetite increases, and their metabolism shifts into storage mode to get ready for the long winter. Our human bodies very likely still retain this ancient autumn-winter program. The problem is, our current Western diet is loaded with massive amounts of omega-6, which is like sending our bodies the message that winter is here every single day, 365 days a year. The signal to quickly store fat has tricked our bodies with this false seasonal cue. Our bodies think they're living in a perpetual autumn, so they endlessly store fat. At this point, we've finally cracked the omega code. We've discovered that the root of the modern obesity crisis very likely comes from this metabolic disaster caused by a severe imbalance in essential fatty acid ratios. This perfectly explains the origins of the two main culprits: high insulin and chronic inflammation. Now that all the clues have been gathered and the case is clear, we understand how our bodies have been pushed step by step into the abyss of obesity by genes, hormones, and especially the food environment full of misleading signals that we ourselves have created. Since we now understand how all of this works, then the path to freedom becomes clear. This is no longer a blind battle of willpower against instinct, but a precise operation using wisdom to change the signals. In the next section, we will officially enter the practical phase and present to you the final chapter of this weight manual, a set of concrete and feasible action plans that can help you reset your weight set point and reclaim control over your body. Friends, we finally reached the most crucial part, the part that can truly change our lives. So what should we do? Since we can't fight our bodies head-on in a foolish, forceful way, can we try a smarter approach? Instead of waging war against our bodies, let's negotiate with them and become their allies. We no longer forcefully command our bodies not to eat, but instead we change the environmental signals we send and kindly say to our bodies, "Hey, old friend, it's actually very safe now. Summer has arrived, the sun is shining, and there's plenty of food. You don't need to store so much fat to get through the winter anymore." When your brain receives these brand new, safe signals, it will willingly and proactively reset your weight set point to a lower, healthier level. And then something amazing will happen. You won't feel as hungry anymore, your metabolism will naturally speed up, your body will be full of energy, and your weight will naturally drop as a result. And this time, it will be maintained in a long-lasting and stable way. Doesn't that sound great? This plan isn't about making you suffer through a short-term diet, but rather it's a long-term lifestyle guide to help you reshape your life, making you healthier and happier. The author provides clear steps in the book. To sum it up, there are 3 core strategies. The first and most important strategy is to eat real food and become your own chef. This is the foundation for resetting the wrong signals in your body. What we need to do is remove the main culprits of the fattening environment from our tables. Specifically, there are 3 things: sugar, refined carbohydrates, especially wheat products like bread, noodles, and cookies, and those artificial vegetable oils rich in omega-6 that we mentioned earlier. When you start buying your own groceries and cooking for yourself, you take back control over your food. You no longer need to study those dizzying ingredient lists, nor be misled by labels like low-fat, high sugar, or sugar-free, possibly high-fat. So what should you eat more of? The answer is simple. Eat more fresh vegetables of all colors. They are rich in valuable omega-3s. Eat more high-quality meats and fish, especially grass-fed beef and lamb, as well as deep-sea fish. They are also important sources of omega-3s. And don't forget eggs, whole milk, and cheese. These natural dairy products provide saturated fats that are nowhere near as scary as we've been told. When you fill up on these naturally delicious foods, your body's insulin levels will stabilize, and the balance of omega fatty acids will gradually be restored. Your body's weight set point will naturally start to drop. The second strategy is to get more sleep and rest, and learn to coexist with stress. This is something we often overlook, but it has a huge impact on your weight set point. Chronic lack of sleep or excessive stress causes our bodies to secrete a stress hormone called cortisol. This hormone directly signals your brain that you're in danger and need to store energy, which in turn raises your weight set point. At the same time, lack of sleep will directly lower the level of leptin in our bodies, which greatly increases our appetite. So try to cut down on scrolling your phone at night. Try to give some of the time you spend watching shows to sleep instead. Dim the lights at home an hour or two before bed. Stay away from screens, read a book, or listen to some music to let your body know it's time to rest. When you get enough high-quality sleep, your cortisol levels will drop and your leptin system will work better. Your weight set point will also decrease as a result. The third strategy is to exercise smartly and enjoy the fun of being active. Remember, the main purpose of exercising is not to painfully count how many calories you've burned on the treadmill, because we already know that the body can easily steal back that energy by lowering your basal metabolism. The real and irreplaceable benefit of exercise is that it can greatly improve our metabolic health. It makes our cells more sensitive to insulin, so the body doesn't need to secrete as much of it. It can effectively lower our stress levels and cortisol, and it also helps us maintain precious muscle, which is the main engine for burning calories in our bodies. So forget about those workouts that make you miserable, and choose an activity you truly enjoy, whether it's dancing, swimming, playing sports, or brisk walking in the park. When exercise is no longer a chore but a source of enjoyment, that's when you can stick with it for the long run, and your body will reward you with a lower weight set point. Of course, you have to make these changes, and especially changing your eating habits is not easy. Our cravings for sugar and refined carbs are often a kind of physiological addiction. When you start to cut down on them, you might go through withdrawal symptoms like headaches, fatigue, and irritability. At this point, you need some psychological strategies to help yourself. The book references advice from clinical psychologists, such as mindful eating techniques. Next time you really want to eat a piece of chocolate, try not to immediately pop it into your mouth. Instead, first look at it with your eyes, smell it with your nose, then take a small piece and let it slowly melt on your tongue. You'll be surprised to find that just a small bite can bring you immense satisfaction, and you no longer need to devour the whole bar. You need to learn to manage, not fight, your cravings. When a craving hits, go for a walk instead. Listen to some music or take a deep breath. You'll find that the urge, like a wave, will rise on its own and eventually fade away on its own as well. Alright friends, that's all for the key points of this book. Thank you for watching, and see you next time with our next book.